Do you want to see how we rig some highlines in Iceland? Check out how to think outside the box on this episode of How Not to Highline. I'm Ryan Jinks and welcome to my gear closet. And yes, I am wearing a puffin hat. And we got this puffin hat in Iceland. We went there for a week and our goal was to establish 5 new lines. And we were able to do it. So check out a few of the clips from our trip.
We gotta go rig that shit.
Okay, so a little backstory on why we went to Iceland. At the last GGBY, I met Robert and Arima playing hacky sack and found out as a well-rounded American that people live in Iceland. So when I got home, I looked up slacklining in Iceland and found on Facebook Slackline Iceland, which is how I met Doddy. And Doddy, being a fan of the How Not to Highline channel, was kind enough to drag our ass all around Iceland so we could set up some lines. He's a local climbing guide and owns the 3rd largest climbing gym in Iceland, so it was great to have him on our team. So Sara Kokkelenberg joined Kim and I, and Robert was able to take some time off work and meet up with us. Now in Iceland, you have to really think outside the box in order to rig anchors, because you can't just bolt stuff and you can't just wrap stuff, and there's no trees and the ground's rocky and nasty. So every anchor took a lot of creativity. We're gonna break this Iceland trip into 5 parts so we can show you every anchor scenario that we ran into. But before we get to our first line, check out slackademics.com. It's a place for anything Slack. We've got tutorials and articles, poetry, podcasts, poems, art, everything you can imagine that's Slackline related. And be sure to follow Slackademics on Facebook because we post our newest content that we add every few days. So now let's talk about how we rigged our first line. It was on the mountain Akrafjall.
That's where we highlined yesterday, in that cloud.
Woo! And the town at the bottom of the mountain is Akranes. Now, Akrafjall was a big mountain, and it didn't look that high, but it was about 800 meters tall. Now, the dilemma was that we wanted our line in a specific place, and one side didn't have anything to wrap or to drill. It was just this mound of moss. Now, the rocks below Doddy here are not something you would want to drill to because they would probably come off, and you don't want to be attached to a rock that's falling. Let's stop and emphasize this. People ask all the time about wrapping trees for anchors, and in this case, we're going to talk about rocks since Iceland's trees aren't that abundant. If you're not super confident in something that you're attaching to, it's actually going to be a lot more dangerous than just like a bolt breaking and your other 3 are going to have to take the load. Now take a look at this boulder here. If we were to put some bolts in it and then come over the top and A-frame where Doddy is sitting, we don't know if that boulder is going to get loose. And if that boulder got loose and fell down the other side, your webbing's not going to hold something like that, and you're going to die. So we decided to dig a dead man anchor. We grabbed a couple meter-long pieces of wood before we headed up there in case we had to build a dead man anchor. And now that we've done a dead man anchor, let's talk about things that you should know about them. Obviously, the thing that holds it is being buried in the ground, so make sure it's deep enough. And also make sure it's packed down. And once you're at the bottom of your hole, it's nice to dig a little sideways so you can stick whatever you're going to bury in under the firm part of the ground. Once you're ready to bury your object, you can girth hitch a static rope or ideally a span set.
What does that look like, Ryan?
Looks like a limp dick that needs to be worked a little.
Now I'm not a fan of putting all my eggs in one basket, or in a hole in this case, so we put in a backup. Now the backup was a rock that we bolted, but we had to find it about 10 meters down the other side. So we brought that up over the top and equalized it with our dead man anchor. And now for the anchor on the other side, we were able to use 3 points of contact. 2 bolts and 1 scorpion wrap.
Let's do it.
Now we weren't able to bolt a huge giant granite monolith of a cliff, but we did get to bolt some giant boulders that were mostly buried in the ground and weren't going to fall off any cliff. I'm not really going to go into the details of bolting here, but if you want to learn more about bolting, we have a whole bolting Bible on slackademics.com. Check it out. Now I didn't get video of the scorpion wrap because it was pretty cold and it started raining and it was the last thing on my mind. I did get better video of all our other highlines, but this first one really wasn't my priority and I was just acclimating to the area. But the concept of a scorpion wrap is pretty easy. Pretend this is a span set and pretend this is a big boulder. You can girth hitch the boulder like so and pull on it for your highline. But if you want it on top, you just turn the girth hitch to the back side and then come up over the top this way. So our 2 bolts were on 2 separate boulders. Those were extended with static rope and put near the scorpion tail. And now all 3 points of our anchor are relatively close to each other. Then we equalize them with a static rope and whoopies like I do for all my anchors. Now I really like this method of rigging, where you take multiple anchor points that are super good enough and you extend them to be near each other and then equalize them like a normal bolted anchor. And by equalizing, not any one anchor point is going to see all the 4s. And by using whoopies, or you can manually tie webbing or rope to each point that extend out to the master point. And those keep it from extending out in case one thing were to slip, fail, break, bust, whatever. It doesn't shock load or affect your safety when you're on the line. Now I highly recommend that you diversify and make your anchor redundant rather than aiming for one bomber piece. Because if you were to be wrong, you're not going to die. Now that doesn't mean you can go use shitty anchors. 4 shitty anchors doesn't equal 1 solid master point. But don't get cocky using one single point, or you could die.
Iceland! Yahoo! Yes!
Hey, rigging with all natural bolting in Iceland might get you killed. Therefore, you shouldn't highline. Hey, don't be a dummy and go rig your first highline after watching a guy in a puffin hat show you how to do it. But instead, invite that guy to your country to show you how to do it personally. Or at least go with somebody who knows what they're doing. But until then, go to slackademics.com, check out these other episodes, and don't forget to subscribe.